Hi there, this is Kevin Patton with a brief audio introduction to episode 52 of the A&P Professor podcast, also known as TAPP Radio, an audio diorama for teachers of human anatomy and physiology. I have a lot of different topics to discuss in the upcoming full episode. The featured topic is going to be using case studies in teaching anatomy and physiology. And I'm also going to bring up an issue with trying to map out the human brain in precise regions. And I'll discuss a claim that the body's biological age can be reversed. And I'll ask the question, have we found the genes for left-handedness? And I'm not only going to ask the question, I'm going to answer it. Well, I'm going to give an answer. It may not be the answer, but I'll give an answer nonetheless. And I'm also going to spend a little bit of time talking about how we respond to individual student questions outside the classroom. That's something that is often perceived to take a lot of our time. Well, how can we shorten that? I'll have some tips and shortcuts. And all of that and more will be in the upcoming full episode number 52. The free distribution of this podcast is sponsored by the Master of Science in Human Anatomy and Physiology Instruction, the Happy degree. I'm on the faculty of this program, so I know the incredible value it is for A&P teachers. Are you looking to power up your game in teaching A&P? When's the last time you had a thorough review of all the core concepts of both anatomy and physiology? Or comprehensive training in contemporary teaching practice? Check out this online graduate program at nycc.edu/happy, that's HAPI, or click the link in the show notes or episode page. Well, I have quite a few word dissections this time, so let's get going here. The first one is not exactly a word dissection because it's not made up of multiple parts based on Latin. It's just a single word based on Latin, and it's an ordinary English word, the word case, as in case study, like a case study item we might ask our A&P students to solve. And it comes from an Old Latin word, casus, C-A-S-U-S, that literally means a fall or an accident, but can also mean an event. And I think that literal meaning is useful, especially in the sense of a fall or an accident, because the case studies that we often use in teaching A&P do involve maybe literally a fall or an accident, but at least some kind of bad thing happening to someone that is a harmful thing happening, such as a disease condition or something like that. Not always, but sometimes our case study items involve some kind of clinical abnormality. The English dictionary definition of case might also be helpful to look at. Now, there are several different definitions for the word case, but there are two dictionary definitions that sort of overlap one another and really do apply to the word case in terms of using it in the longer-term case study. The first dictionary definition in this case, I used the word case. I didn't mean to do that, but it just came out. In this case, the first of two definitions we're going to use is instance of the occurrence or existence of something. In other words, there's something that may occur or may exist, and we're going to look at an instance of that. The second dictionary definition that I think applies here is sort of a more specific application of that first definition, and it states a particular or specific occurrence that is studied or investigated. So it's a specific occurrence. It's sort of what definition number one is saying, but it adds on that idea that we're going to look into it. And I think that applies especially well to the case studies that we're going to be using in teaching anatomy and physiology. Now, the next word to dissect is a little bit more dissectable, and it's one that you're likely to have already dissected for your students, but it's good practice to look at this. The word hypercalcemia is going to come up in the full episode. And if we break that apart, we have the first word part, hyper, which means excessive or exaggerated. And then calc, C-A-L-C, that literally means lime, which is calcium oxide. But in this case, it refers to the element calcium, or actually, in this case, the ionic form of that element, the calcium ion. So that's calc. And then eme, so our word is hypercalcemia. So we discussed hyper, calc. Now the eme part is a shortened form of the word part hemo, which means blood. So it's derived from a Greek word that sounds similar. Hemo, the word part, means blood. So far we have hyper, calc, and eme. Now the ia ending means condition. And if we take those last two word parts, eme and ia, that's IA, and put them together, we get emia. And that's usually how we break apart the word part, but really, as I just showed you, it can be broken down twice. So it means blood condition. So the eme is blood, ia is condition. So putting it all together, it's where we have excess calcium ions in the blood. It's a condition where we have excess calcium ions in the blood, hypercalcemia. So let's look at the word parcellation. And I will be honest with you. I never heard the word parcellation until I read it recently in an article that I'm going to be discussing in the full episode. So bless your heart if you are already familiar with the term parcellation, but I wasn't. So even just for my own edification, I wanted to dissect it so that I could understand it better and be more likely to put it into my long-term memory and really own that term. So parcellation starts with the word parts, parse and L, which make up a regular English word, parcel. So the parse means part, and L, E-L, means little or small. So a parcel is a little part, a small part. So that usually refers to a small package. It can also mean to a small plot of land, like on a map or a deed or something like that. So parcel. But the whole word is parcellation. So what does that mean? Well, the AT that comes after parcel in this word parcellation is a shortened form of the word part that we see in a lot of different terms, which is ATE. And ATE goes back to an old Latin usage that literally, when you add it to a term, it means the office of whatever it is, or holding the office of whatever that is. But it can also mean the condition of, or the state of. So if you parcellate something, you put it in a state of a small part. And parcellation is the process of parcellating. And so that ION ending, or TION ending, makes it a process. So we put it all together, and parcellation is when we divide something up into small little units. So now it makes sense, right? I mean, it's a simple concept, but parcellation, I don't know if that ever came up in the crossword puzzles I regularly work on. I think I'd have to solve all the other clues around it before I came up with that. The next term is another one that really doesn't need to be divided up, but it's a term that comes up in a couple of different ways when we study anatomy, and that is the word atlas. And I'm going to be using it in the full episode in the sense of a bound collection of maps or tables. And we use that term atlas when we're talking about, let's say a lab atlas, which is a collection of maps or tables or images that we might use in the laboratory to help, for the students to help themselves find the parts of a dissection specimen, for example, or the parts of a bone or the parts of the whole skeleton. So that's an atlas. So that's an anatomy atlas. Could be a dissection atlas, could be an A&P laboratory atlas, a bone atlas, it could be a histology atlas, all kinds of different atlases. And that is named for, as many of you know, a figure in classical mythology who was one of the Titans. He was the brother of Prometheus and Epimetheus, who were also Titans, and Atlas was condemned to support the sky on his shoulders. And that sort of came to be imagined as Atlas holding up the entire world on his shoulders. And when we start imagining the world as being a globe, then we start imagining Atlas with the globe of the earth on his shoulders. And early geographic atlases often pictured the mythological Atlas holding up a globe of the world. And so that was a collection of maps, right? So the term atlas became synonymous with a collection of maps or tables. Now, of course, we also use the word atlas to name one of the bones of the vertebral column. And that would be the first cervical vertebra, which is holding up, in a way, it's holding up the skull, which, use your imagination, that can be sort of like the globe of the earth. So, yeah, that's an apt name for cervical vertebra number 1. So that's the word atlas, going back to its origins, not really dissecting it, but going back to its origins. Now, the next term I want to dissect, we are going to actually chop this one up, and it's epigenome. But before we do that, I want to go back to a word dissection that I did in episode 30, or the preview to episode 30, when we were looking at the word epigenetic. And epigenetic is made up of the word part epi, E-P-I, which means upon, and gen, G-E-N, which means make or create. But in this case, it refers to genes. And then the IC ending means relating to. So if we put that all together, epigenetic means something or relating to something upon the genes. And in actual use, what it refers to is a kind of inheritance. Epigenetic inheritance is not transmission to offspring strictly by way of the genes, but instead by some factor that's operating upon the genes. Upon the genes, that's epigenetic. So epigenome then is sort of an altered version, another word that's based on these word parts. And it has that OME ending, the ohm ending, which we've seen before. And you're probably familiar with the idea that ohm means an entire collection of something. And so the epigenome is the entire collection of epigenetic markers in the genome. So it could be your genome, or it could be my genome, or it could be the mythical human genome, or mammalian genome, or whatever. So that's epigenome, and that's going to come up in the full episode as well. So, wow, that was a lot of word dissections, wasn't it? And that's all for today. This podcast is sponsored by HAPS, the Human Anatomy and Physiology Society, promoting excellence in the teaching of human anatomy and physiology for over 30 years. Go visit HAPS at theapprofessor.org/HAPS. That's HAPS. You're probably wondering, does he have a book club recommendation for us this time? And the answer is yes. Yes, I do. And it's a really great book. It's one that I'm not quite finished reading, but I'm almost there, and I'm really loving it. It's called Heart, A History by Sundeep Johar. Now, Johar is a practicing cardiologist. You can occasionally read in the New York Times or hear on public radio, and he's in a bunch of other media places as well. So you may have already heard of him, and he's got a couple other books out that were very popular, so you may have already read some of his books. The title of this book, Heart, A History, seems like it would just say it all, and it kind of does. But it's a bit different and a bit better than I first thought by just reading the title. What it is an interweaving of Johar's personal and family history, from his grandfather's early death from a cardiac episode, through his cardiology training and his clinical experience as a cardiologist with his patients, and with the story of how all of humanity has understood and related to the heart, both metaphorically and as an organ. And it's fascinating to read about the people who made great breakthroughs in visualizing the heart and measuring its functions, and some of them broke some really strong taboos about what we can or should be doing with the heart surgically and medically. Or some of them just simply overcame the fear and reluctance to make bold experiments and develop some of the common life-prolonging cardiac procedures that we see and hear about and experience today. And he also uses that background that he weaves to discuss the limits of health technology and the role of our own life choices in heart health. So it covers all kinds of things and draws them all together to give us a deeper understanding of the heart and a deeper understanding of sort of what has led us to our current understanding of what the heart is, how it works, what can be done when something goes wrong. Now, this kind of book could potentially be dry and, yes, boring. I've read some of those. Well, I read the first part of them at least. But this one truly is engaging. Frequent listeners of this podcast know that I love a good story. And you know what? Sundeep Johar can tell a great story. For anyone teaching the biology of the heart, that is, anyone teaching anatomy and physiology, this book is not only an enjoyable entertainment, it's a great resource for enriching the stories of the heart that we share with our students. If you want to know more, just go to the approfessor.org/book club. Book club is all one word. The approfessor.org/book club. And besides an affiliate link where you can find out more about the book at its Amazon page, there's also a link to a brief video where the author walks us through an angiogram and how it works. Something you might want to share with your A&P students. Now, this is one of my recent favorites among books of interest to A&P professors. You've got one too. You have a favorite, right? Or maybe several favorites. Why not share your discoveries with the rest of us? If you do that now, you'll likely be one of 5 that will be in the drawing for an Amazon Kindle Fire HT10 tablet. There's still some open spots in that group of 5. So please record or write a book recommendation for the A&P Professor Book Club and send it to podcast@theapprofessor.org. It's really easy. There's a voice recorder right there on your smartphone, I'm sure. And if you've written a book you think A&P teachers might be interested in reading, even if it's not all that recent, contact me so we can get you on an upcoming episode to talk about it. A searchable transcript and a captioned audiogram of this preview episode are funded by AAA, the American Association for Anatomy, at anatomy.org. Well, this is Kevin Patton signing off for now and reminding you to keep your questions and comments coming. Why not call the podcast hotline right now at 1-833-LION-DEN. That's 1-833-546-6336. Or visit us at theapprofessor.org. I'll see you down the road. Paid sponsorships and affiliate links help defray podcast expenses. I sometimes receive compensation for teaching courses, consulting, speaking, telling stories, writing educational content, and other activities mentioned in this podcast.